This is Corporate Warrior, high-intensity training lifestyle and business with Neal, helping you improve your health and physique, become a great personal trainer, and start and grow your hit business.
This episode is brought to you by the Resistance Exercise Conference, the science and application of strength training for health and human performance. Would you like to learn from the top strength training professionals and researchers, network and connect with other exercise professionals from all over the world, and get inspired, rejuvenated, and focused on your strength training business? I certainly do, and that is why this will be my second appearance at the conference. It was my favorite weekend in 2018, and I am really excited to attend again this year. There will be keynote presentations from Dr. Doug McGuff, Dr. Jeremy Lowenecki, Dr. James Fisher, and Luke Carlson. Moreover, the attendee has become the center of the conference. There will be a new element where the audience will participate in a crowdsourcing activity to voice challenges, questions, and goals for the keynotes to address head-on. The conference will be held on the 22nd and 23rd of March 2019 in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Graduate Hotel. Register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. If you want to take your strength training business to the next level and build a world-class strength training network, I highly recommend you come along and register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. When you register, please add Corporate Warrior to the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. Neal here, and welcome back to corporatewarrior.co. My guest today is Scott Myslinski. Scott is the host of the Carnivore Cast podcast, which dives deep into the carnivore diet and lifestyle by interviewing doctors, researchers, and long-term carnivores who've overcome a variety of diseases and conditions. Scott has been a carnivore for over 2 years, and with the addition of resistance training, is absolutely jacked. Has improved his body composition, energy, and cognitive performance. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thanks for the kind intro, and thrilled to be here. I've listened to probably every episode of the show, some multiple times, so very excited.
Very flattering indeed. No, I'm really chuffed to have you on the show. And as I was saying offline, I've been thinking about this podcast a lot. 14 days into my own carnivore experiment, which is just beef. Nice. Salt, congrats. Coffee, and water, I believe. Although I did accidentally eat a couple of peas the other day, but we'll forget about that. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting experience. So I'm curious. I'm highly skeptical, and I'd love to hear what you've learned about the diet. I know you've been doing it for, as you said there, 2 years. So should we just kick this one off by talking about how you got started, why you decided to go carnivore in the first place?
Yeah, excellent. Happy to, and I'll try to keep it on the briefer side, and we can expand on certain areas if that's helpful. Cool. So my background is I'm 26 years old now, and in university I was a competitive lightweight rower, and before that, 2 to 3 hours of chronic cardio a day, sometimes more, year round. And a lot of cutting weight and binging afterwards, not eating the healthiest foods, still kind of diet conscious, but not super. And that probably did a lot of damage, both in terms of gut health. Also, I definitely lost lean mass and possibly bone mass doing that, which some DEXAs told me. And so after rowing, and when I started work, I was working in management consulting where I was doing 80-hour weeks on average. So I had to stay in shape with something else. Thankfully, I found Body by Science just before I graduated university, which was great. And that's how I came upon your show and had learned a lot and adapted that training once to twice a week. But I also wanted to make sure that I was eating sort of an appropriate diet that would keep me healthy. So it was a very gradual transition over years from, more standard American diet, probably with more focus on protein, to a paleo type approach, to low carb, to a ketogenic type approach, and then eventually trying carnivore for the first time a little over 2 years ago, as you spoke of. And each step along the way, I just felt a little bit better. I was more satisfied with my food. All the benefits people speak about getting on a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, I just felt them intensify with each step, and not even marginally, but substantially. And so that's what kind of attracted me to it. And, following folks like Sean Baker, thanks to your podcast and other shows, had inspired me to give this a try.
So when you first tried carnivore, did you have any sort of adaptation period or challenges with it?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I think a lot of folks don't talk about this enough, which is having GI distress whenever you change a diet. So I think this works anytime you change your diet. I think it takes around 4 to 8 weeks for your microbiome to adapt. So if I were to start adding vegetables back in or testing something like mushrooms to add back into my diet, even if they weren't necessarily harmful for me, for the first 4 to 8 weeks, I would expect my stomach to be like, what's going on? And I'd probably have either some form of constipation or diarrhea. And it works the same way when you're moving to carnivore. All of a sudden you're ingesting a lot of meat, probably more protein than you were on a ketogenic diet, maybe more fat, definitely more animal fat. And a lot of people's guts, I heard on Rob Wolf's podcast that 90% of people have insufficient stomach acid. So I definitely experienced some of that. For a long time, I was very bloated on carnivore, actually. And I was experiencing this thing where I would just burp for like hours. And sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and just couldn't stop burping. It was a very painful sensation. But I think, there were some things I could have done while I was adapting that would have helped. But in general, and some people have different symptoms too. Some people, when they try carnivore for the first time, they're just really constipated for a long time. Other people, have to go to the toilet all the time while their body is learning to digest all that fat. So it's different for everyone, but I think there's definitely an adaptation period.
Now that's really interesting because I've certainly gone through some of that adaptation myself. I'll go into probably more detail on my personal situation further on, but I had no issues at the start, and then I had some, shall we say, GI distress, a small amount, some cravings. So it's interesting. So, okay, so even though you had some of those symptoms, it didn't stop you from continuing to get through it. Is that because you had learned that it would take some time for you to adapt, and you wanted to kind of just pull through that? Because a lot of people would have those symptoms and just stop and go back to their previous diet.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's hard to put myself in the state of mind I was in back then, but I think I wanted to make it work. I still felt very good energy-wise, better than I had, and I enjoyed it more. I was more satisfied with my meals. Felt like when I was doing just purely a ketogenic diet with a little bit less meat, I was like hungry all the time and never full or never completely satisfied where I could take my mind off food. So I think I enjoyed those benefits so much that I was willing to stick it out. I had not heard as much about the adaptation period and that those issues might resolve. So for a long time, I was actually just kind of worried about my stomach and what was going on. I think I even tried switching back to ketogenic for a little bit and it didn't help. So I was like, okay, well, if it's going to be this way, whether I'm carnivore or keto, I might as well do carnivore if I feel better that way. But yeah, it took a while. And I think a lot of people now are, with getting started guides and stuff, are suggesting taking some digestive enzymes at the start. One really good one is betaine HCl, which you can take with a meal, and then lipase. And I think if I had been more conscious of that and known about those, it could have completely eliminated those problems with adaptation.
Right. Okay. So for you, what were you obviously in the bio, you mentioned a couple things that improved for you, but what were those the key things? Energy, cognitive performance, your body composition, were those the key kind of outcomes that you saw improve on the carnivore diet, or were there other things as well?
Yeah, there were other things as well. My recovery from workouts was way better. Mark Strout speaks about this a lot, both on my podcast and your podcast, just being able to recover from resistance training a lot better. I saw my strength improve in the gym. I felt like in terms of cardiovascular performance, it was like my work capacity had gone way up in the gym, so I could move from one exercise to the next, with a little rest. I could do more exercises, whereas, maybe 6 to 10 exercises, I would be gassed and just completely wiped and have to limp out of the gym. I would be like, hey, I feel like I can do a few more. So that from a physical standpoint. And then I would say my sleep improved eventually, but at first it was actually impaired. And that has a little bit to do with meal timing and meal frequency. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, that's a whole load of things that come up for me during your last statement there. But yeah, I know I'd love to hear a day of eating, just to get details on what you eat in terms of the frequency, any supplements, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I follow, based on a lot of research from folks like Bill Lagakos, who's a great nutritionist, and I think he has like a PhD in biochemistry. His website is Calories Proper, and he's written a few books. He is an expert in circadian rhythms. He's kind of the guy who's championing the whole blocking blue light movement, or at least was one of the pioneers there. And I know both Ted Naiman and Skylar Tanner are huge fans of him. Skylar was actually the first person to turn me on to him. He is huge about this thing called early time restricted feeding. So a lot of folks are doing intermittent fasting where they skip breakfast, they don't eat till noon, then they eat a huge meal at noon, and then they eat a big meal at dinner, thanks to Martin Birkin. But there's a lot of reasons, and I did that for years. There's a lot of reasons why that can be harmful. One is when you wake up, your cortisol spikes. That's what actually wakes you up in the morning. And by eating a large meal at the beginning of the day, you can bring that back down, the stress hormone cortisol, to sort of regulate that. And there's also been tons of studies that have shown people eating an equal amount of meals. If they have breakfast and lunch versus lunch and dinner, they eat less when they have breakfast and lunch. So it's a way of resetting your circadian rhythm, making you more full for the day, having more energy, and also reducing the stress effect of skipping breakfast. The other thing it does is there's a lot of research showing that if you have a large meal within 3 to 4 hours of going to bed, which I was doing regularly, I would eat dinner at say 6 or 7 p.m. because I was doing that, sort of 12 to 8 p.m. fast eating window. If you go to bed at like 9 or 10, you won't get any deep sleep because your body is focusing so much on digesting that it actually prevents you from entering deep sleep. So I have shifted my meal times, and a day of eating for me looks like I have a very large breakfast, usually at about 8 a.m. I will have 1.25 pounds to 1.5 pounds of meat. Sometimes eggs. I'd say on average probably have 6 eggs a week, which isn't a lot, but it's mostly ground beef or steaks. And usually it's grain finished meat. All meat is grass fed. It's actually a myth that there's grass fed and grain fed meat. Most meat is just grain finished, meaning the cow spends 80% of its life on pasture, and then for the last few months they fatten it up on grain. And it's not just grain; it's like a bunch of other. It's a mix of like barley and oats and not just grass or not just wheat. And then so I eat 1.25 pounds to 1.5 pounds of grain finished meat in the morning. Sometimes it'll be grass finished. Then at lunch around noon, I'll eat another 1.25 pounds to 1.5 pounds. And then my last meal of the day will be about 4:30 or 5 p.m. and I'll have just 0.5 pound of meat. So much smaller meal, enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which I think is important. But again, I'm shifting my calories to earlier in the day.
So 3 main meals effectively in that. Yeah. And you dose it out like that for muscle gain reasons, right? Rather than the 2 meals. Is that primarily the reason for that?
Yeah, that's primarily the reason. And I also just feel good doing it that way. If I were to make it 2 meals, and I wanted to get the same, 3 to 3.5 pounds of meat, I don't know exactly how I would make it work because it would have to be, let's say I cut out lunch, but I still don't want to have more than half a pound for dinner around 5 p.m. So what am I going to have? 3 pounds for breakfast? So I'd have to like shift my late meal to like 3 p.m. or something, and then eat from like 8 to 3. But then the fasting window is a little bit too long. Ted Naiman speaks about, the problems with fasting more than 18 hours a day. You potentially start to get muscle breakdown, and I really don't want that. So that's kind of why I do the 3 meals. It works very well for my lifestyle.
I haven't heard about that. That's interesting. A lot of the stuff you just said I had not heard about at all, which is fascinating. Kind of, I'm experiencing some kind of not cognitive dissonance, but just insecurities around not knowing some of this stuff. But no, it's really interesting. And do you have? I can't remember if last time we spoke. Do you still take a protein shake as well, and any of that?
Yeah. So I had been doing that for about a month, and then I talked to some folks from your podcast, like Borga Fagurli. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm sure I did. And Kevin Stock, who has been on my podcast, who's a former physique athlete and researcher and doctor, and many others, and just ask them, and also, your whole inquiry into fasted training and James Steele about whether fasted training is suboptimal. And I've gone back and forth on this many times. I'm not sure, but I tend to train around 7 o'clock in the morning. So the last week or so, I have been re-experimenting with having just a super plain, unflavored whey protein shake before my workout, about half an hour to an hour before my workout, just so I have some circulating amino acids and protein in my blood that can be digested as I'm coming out of that workout.
Got it. Okay. And do you take any supplements at the moment?
Yes, I do. I don't think supplements are necessary, but I choose to take a few. So I take a magnesium a few hours before bed. It's a chelated Solgar brand magnesium. I take L-theanine, which is just sort of an agent that's in black tea and green tea that sort of calms you down. It's in a lot of like pre-workout or pre-bedtime supplement mixes. And again, these are like very cheap because I'm just buying the single ingredient. I'm not buying like, a pre-workout mix or a bedtime mix. And then I take half a caffeine pill before I go to the gym in the morning because I'm training so early. I don't want to like go find coffee. So I just have half a caffeine pill before I go to the gym. And then when I get into work, I'll have half a coffee. Whereas on the days I don't train, I just have a full coffee. So I think that's mostly it in terms of supplements. Not really taking anything else right now. I take DHEA occasionally because my blood levels have been somewhat low, but again, I don't know if that's necessary or optimal. And I was taking a liver supplement for a long time just because I have a hard time eating it. If you're curious about organ meats, you can hear me drown on about this with my guests for hours on my podcast, but I'm not sure if they're necessary or not.
Interesting. What's one of the things that's really interesting to me is on the carnivore diet is how everything changes in the context, or a lot of things change in the context of a carnivore diet. Right. So I've been listening to obviously a lot of your episodes, and the things around, the requirements for vitamins and minerals being much lower on a diet that is void of carbohydrate, and how carbohydrate and a lot of these electrolytes kind of compete in your body. And I didn't know that. And I don't think many people know that actually. And I find that very, very interesting. And it kind of makes sense to me, and it kind of answers the question as to why there are so many people doing a carnivore diet, in some cases decades, who are having no issues, no health issues, no scurvy, stuff like that. So that's something that's been very interesting to me. Is that something that you've explored further in your own quest, or anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you summed it up well. The only other thing I would say is some of my blood values for certain nutrients have been low. I think I get more blood work than the average person or the average carnivore. Again, blood values can be deceiving. So for instance, on low carb or ketogenic diets, people traditionally have lower thyroid. And doctors will be like, oh, your thyroid's low, need to get you some thyroid hormone, get that thyroid back up. But on a ketogenic diet, because your metabolism is becoming more efficient, you don't need as much thyroid. So that's why the blood levels naturally decrease. So for instance, my folate was very low after like a year and a half on a carnivore diet. Is that because you don't need as high of folate levels on a carnivore diet? I don't know. But I started eating more liver to potentially help with that because you don't find folate in muscle meat. So it's one of those things where it's like the blood value is lower. I'm getting less of it in my food. But is that a problem in the context of a carnivore diet? Some would say yes. Some would say no.
Yeah, I've heard Ted Naiman be concerned about that. I think he mentioned that on my show ages ago about the folate, which is an interesting point. What are the goals that are kind of determining your existing preferences around diet and supplements and frequency? Like, what are you kind of pursuing or trying to maintain?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I'm definitely trying to gain muscle mass and bone density. As I said, several years ago, I had a DEXA scan done and I had the bone density of a 90-year-old woman, which shocked the DEXA scan people as well as all the doctors and endocrinologists I saw at various hospitals when they redid the DEXA scan and confirmed it. They were like, we don't even have a diagnosis for this because you can't be osteoporotic when you're 24 years old. So they just labeled it very low bone density for age. And so I am like probably 15% body fat. If I was really vain, I could say I could get more ripped, I could lose body fat. But I am so concerned with not losing bone mass and trying to build back up my lean mass that I think was sacrificed or stunted for so many years because of the rowing, that my goals are purely focused on long-term sustainable lean mass gain.
Right. Okay. So has the bone mineral density improved since going carnivore, did you say?
Good question. I have not had a DEXA scan yet. I will probably have one done this summer. Bone grows so freaking slowly. Some people would even say it can't grow. You can only maintain it. So I haven't been like, oh man, need to get a new bone density scan every 3 months. You know, in that type of time period, you might see an increase in muscle mass, but I would be shocked to find anyone who sees substantial increases in bone mass over a period of time that short. So I will have one done this summer, and don't hold your breath, but I'll report back on that.
Have you experienced any negative symptoms as a result of having low bone density?
Absolutely not. I haven't had any broken bones, any sore bones. I don't even know what that means or would feel like, but no, I don't think I have.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And let's tell us quickly about your training regimen.
Yeah. So I think starting in 2014, so about 4.5 years ago, no, even earlier than that, 5 years ago, I started high intensity training, a la Doug McGuff, big 5 exercises on life fitness equipment, which if you haven't heard of it is just a very mass market, not great gym equipment brand that's in most commercial gyms, at least here in the US. I was doing that as a student once a week to failure, not under the guidance of an instructor. I think it was pretty intense. Who knows? My strength went up for sure. Didn't notice amazing results from it, but definitely gained some strength because I was coming from a world of no resistance training and just the chronic cardio, as I spoke about. Did that, eventually found a MEDX certified and resistance renaissance exercise. Is that, yeah, Renex. Yep. Certified, super slow certified trainer in the Philadelphia area named John Parr. Shout out to John. Trained with him for like 10 sessions. He was incredible. I'd say he had a MEDX Big 6 set up, And I'd say my training and my form and my ability to push myself and contract my muscles elevated completely under him.
How do you spell his last name? Just want to make sure I get it right.
Parr.
Oh,
he has
yeah,
his
I know
own
John.
studio in the Philadelphia area. I think it's in Bryn Mawr now, called Overload Fitness. Highly encourage folks to drop in and check out John. And he has a more extensive setup now than just the Big Six. But I trained with him for a bit. That helped a lot. And then I switched over under, I was obsessing with Corporate Warrior podcast at the time and listened to James Steele a lot. But inspired by him, I switched to a body weight type workout. Varied between once and twice a week, chin-ups, push-ups with handles, squats, wall sits, all that for a long time. I'd say I did that for 2.5 years. And then more recently, I switched back to machines. After consulting with Skylar Tanner, he gave me the guidance that based on bone density, it might be more effective to use machines, and it might not be sufficient resistance to increase or sustain bone mass just doing body weight exercises. Because muscles, we know, don't require a certain load to generate hypertrophy. You can stimulate a muscle just by isometric contractions. Jeremy Leneke has shown that. Which you've spoken about on your podcast.
Even low loads as well.
Yeah, but for bone, there's a belief that you need a higher load. Now, are machines enough to stimulate that? We don't know. Some people say you need 3 times your body weight in load to stimulate bone. So that's why like gymnasts have so much bone density, because they're slamming onto the floor, onto the mat so often. But anyway, I switched to machine training twice a week because I'm young. I'm able to recover. I get great sleep. I'm on a carnivore diet. I figured I could train more. And then more recently, starting last summer, I switched to Borges Fagurli and Abel Saibe. I know you were on his podcast. They have a sustainable self-development program. I purchased that and have been doing that. It's 3 times a week, full body training. The workouts are 30 minutes or less. And it's basically uses a combination of myo reps, which you spoke about with him, which is essentially taking one set close to failure of 10 to 20 reps and then pausing for 10 to 15 seconds and then doing repeating that for mini sets. So you do a set might be 15 reps, take 4 deep breaths, do 4 reps, 4 deep breaths, 4 reps, 4 deep breaths, 4 reps, and then 3 reps. And then you'd stop as soon as the rep count tapers off. And that's it. You just do 1 myo rep set per exercise, full body 3 times a week. So that's what I've been doing since August. I haven't had objective measures of body composition, but subjectively and according to folks around me, my family, friends, coworkers, my fiance, I have substantially increased the size of my chest, my arms, and my shoulders since switching to that routine. And I've really enjoyed it. So it's still what most would consider low volume and still efficient, but it is not, one set to momentary muscular failure. So that's what I've been doing in terms of my training.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just to clarify that. So you started that last summer.
Yep. I started around Labor Day.
Okay. And when you stand on the scales, how much more weight are you seeing?
I've gained about 10 pounds. And my waist has gotten an inch or 2 smaller.
Wow. Okay. And, I remember us talking about this before. And one of the things you explained to me is that it's your belief that maybe the increased frequency, but just training short of failure is one of the kind of things that have, for want of a better word, that has kind of enabled you to make this progress. Is that the only thing that you think is contributing to that, or do you think it's a cluster of things?
I think it's that, as well as slightly higher volume. So, I was the pinnacle of, not in terms of like fame, but in terms of my beliefs and research around high intensity training, the believer in 1 set to failure is sufficient, is all you need, is going to get you the maximum results. And I believed that for a long time. I had read a lot of research on it. I had read Doug's book, both of Doug's books, several times, read a lot of the original research coming from Fisher and Steele. And I still think that is a great workout, and that will get you probably 50% of the possible gains you could get from working out. But what I have come around to is the idea that if you train short of failure, just short of failure, but still enough to stimulate the muscle, you're able to get in more volume, more mechanical tension, and more contractions, which can create greater hypertrophy and greater gains. So just in the same way that you would say, doing triple negative drop sets on a leg press exercise is probably not productive because it's just going to create excess muscle damage that doesn't result in further hypertrophy and just delays your recovery. I would say the same conclusion is probably true about taking every set to complete muscular failure because, one of the studies that is cited a lot is, I believe it was 2 or 3 sets to failure was compared to 5 sets of short of failure training. And they had equal gains. So someone from the high intensity crowd might look at that study and say, 2 sets to failure beats 5 sets to failure, 5 sets not to failure. You should always go to failure. Someone in the volume crowd would say, you should never go to failure because you can get in more sets without going to failure and get the same gains as going to failure. And it would allow you to recover faster and get in more volume and maybe train, 2 days later instead of 5 days later. So it's an ongoing debate. No one has definitive answers, but at least from my own experience in testing this out, and it's just the same thing with carnivore. I'd encourage people to test things on themselves and not be dogmatic. But I'm starting to think that there may be a lot in the message of stimulate, don't annihilate, and I think that can be turned on the high intensity crowd, even saying annihilating might mean just taking a set to full failure. That might be annihilation, which isn't necessary to stimulate all the muscle fibers. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's very, very interesting. And I'm actually interested in maybe experimenting myself with a similar regime. Did you, so this is interesting. So this 10-pound gain you've experienced, do you think, so when you started the carnivore diet 2 years ago, did you see any gains or subjective gains, comments from people before starting this new training regime? Because you had been doing the carnivore diet for whatever it is, 1.5 years leading up to it.
Yeah. So I'd say another mistake I made when I started the carnivore diet is I tried to eat as much as Sean Baker every single day.
Good luck with that.
Is like 4 to 5 pounds of fatty meat. Jesus. And I talked about this I alluded to it when I was talking about the meal frequency, but I think another thing that can interfere with sleep is eating too much, both late at night and just throughout the whole day. Just as caloric restriction can be a major stressor on the body, caloric overload can be a major stressor on the body. And you've talked about this on some of your bulking episodes and with Doug McGuff. I personally, some people say when they're in bulking mode or eating a little bit more calories, they have more energy, they can work out more, they sleep better. I found and maybe it's because bulking means something different for me. When I'm eating 5,000 calories a day, I just felt tired all of the time and like run down, and my sleep wasn't great. I was sweating during the night, like just really uncomfortable. And I probably gained some fat during that time. It was like not great. Maybe I gained some muscle too, but it's the short answer is I think when I started carnivore, I was not being as conscious about my meal timing and volume, and I overate, and I think it got me a little bit fat. It got me poor results in that way.
Got it. Okay. So, and just to clarify as well, you, from what I understand, even since starting this new regime, and perhaps, well, I guess after you'd kind of realized your error in eating too much, you haven't changed your caloric intake. You've just kept it your, whatever it is, your 3.5 pounds a day 3 meals a day intake. So it sounds like you don't attribute your gains to a calorie surplus, or at least planned calorie surplus, I should say.
I don't. Again, I'm not tracking that meticulously, but since starting this regime and under some guidance from Kevin Stock, a lot of people say, especially when you're adapting to carnivore, you start with fatty meats. You want to, keep, ribeyes, fatty ground beef, etc. And I think that's correct. But after you adapt, I think, a lot of people will find they fare better and feel better with a slightly lower fat intake. Not meaning low fat, but meaning more Ted Naiman-esque, 90-10 ground beef, or, something closer to a 2 grams of protein to 1 gram of fat, or 1.5 grams of protein to 1 gram of fat ratio. So maybe, you enjoy New York strips or, sirloin to fatty ribeyes. I've found that to be the case for me too. So actually, since starting this program and around the same time, I switched to a higher protein, slightly lower fat ratio, some days even purposely restricting my protein and fat intake overall, to the point where I was still getting 200 grams of protein a day, but I was eating, less than 100 grams of fat. I don't do that anymore, but I do focus still on leaner cuts because I find I feel and perform better with less fat. Now, I wouldn't say in either of those scenarios was my protein low at all. In both of those scenarios, my protein was over 200 grams a day. So I don't think it's fair to say, oh, Scott, you've made some gains because you've upped your protein. My protein was super high under both conditions. I've just actually dialed back the fat and therefore probably dialed back the calories in the same time period that I think I've made significant muscle gains on this new program.
That's interesting. I think I just want to underscore something. This is the thing. Like, you're not someone who's like just doing something totally different, or some ways different to high intensity strength training. I've known you for years. You've tried every protocol under the sun. You've been there kind of alongside me, learning about high intensity training, trying different routines, trying different frequency, volume, intensity. Always being skeptical and critical minded, and reading everything and implementing it and paying attention. And I just think it's a good message that you're sending to people that are into HIIT, maybe people like you and I who are looking to improve their physique, build more muscle. It's fine to deviate a little bit. You don't have to be so dogmatic about high intensity training. You can deviate and try something else. And if it doesn't get you better results, or you don't enjoy it, you can always revert back. There's no issue in that. It's obviously, Scott, you've raised a lot of caveats, and you can't say for certain, whether or not this protocol has definitely increased your muscle mass. Well, it sounds like it has. Maybe that's partly placebo. Who the fuck knows? But it is really, really fascinating, and I'm definitely going to be re-listening to some of this to, I guess, inform perhaps my own approach going forward in terms of what I experiment with, because my training is actually almost, I wouldn't say other end of the spectrum, but it's pretty different to yours in that I'm doing Doug McGuff's freeway split probably once every 4 to 6 days. So, a biceps and back workout, a shoulder tricep workout, and a lower body workout. And normally no more than kind of 4 or 5 exercises, done 1 set to failure with a drop set, although that's kind of changing depending on how sore I feel the next day. So I did a lower body workout where I drop set everything, and it was horrific. My DOMs for the next 2 days were pretty bad. And I kind of thought that maybe I overtrained. Maybe I did a bit too much. And I've experienced that when I've done too much in a way of like drop setting, like you say, annihilating rather than stimulating. And so actually I've been talking to Art Lichtfoot, who's a mutual friend, and he's been giving me some guidance on, reducing some of that, I guess, intensity and volume in order to reduce the soreness the following day and ensure that I'm not creating kind of an overtraining syndrome. But I've been doing this for a while now. I've seen some good progress in terms of strength, which you always see, obviously, with a new program. But it would be good to test what you're doing and seeing if I see any further benefit from that. So I'll probably be checking my emails because I know you've sent over the protocol to me in the past. So.
Yeah. I wouldn't share the exact protocol because it is a paid program, but I've shared something similar and like a modified version of a program I'm doing. The other thing I'd say is I would encourage folks to check out Doug McGuff's recent interview with Abel Saibei. That's spelled Csabei. He actually, on that show, and I've heard him talk about this in the past, is he thinks there is merit, especially if you're on non-optimal equipment, so non-Med-X or Nautilus, where the strength curve isn't perfect, to maybe taking sets, 2 or 1 rep short of failure and being able to do a second set or a third set. And I know when he's in the conventional gym setting, he often does clusters, which are, mini sets of 5-ish reps with, a short, 30 to 1 minute rest period in between. You keep doing that until you get close to failure as a way of sort of accumulating fatigue because the strength curves aren't optimal and also getting in more volume. So, keep an open mind about this. Even the author of Body by Science is open to these things and talking about things like this.
Yeah, didn't he mention? I really enjoyed that interview, and I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. Didn't he mention something about the number of contractions? That there may be something to that in terms of optimizing hypertrophy, and
exactly.
that in a single set to failure, you might not be getting as many contractions versus more of a high volume approach that you described, and maybe that's an important part of the mechanism.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he talked about, and completely agree. I think that's part of it, and also accumulating more volume load and more mechanical tension could also be a factor. I think we just don't have answers to all these questions yet.
Yeah, and because we don't have answers, it's a great time to experiment. So,
exactly.
just to reinforce that. Now, let's get back to carnivore diet because I've got a bunch of things I want to talk about. I want to kind of use this as an opportunity to share my experience with you and the audience so far. So, I've been doing beef, water, salt, and coffee with some decaf for 14 days. It's been pretty damn hard at times, if I'm honest. But it's been very interesting all the same. So let's dig into this. So one of the things that really appealed to me is, firstly, I was eating a pretty, as you know, Scott, carnivorous diet beforehand. So my diet beforehand, and a lot of the audience will know this, was basically steak, ribeyes, eggs, omelets. And I normally have 2 meals a day. So a meal around lunch. I normally have 1 or 2 coffees in the morning, maybe a snack on a little bit of dark chocolate throughout the day. And then my evening meal would be the same steaks, maybe some eggs, but then normally some type of carbohydrate. So potato and vegetables or a bit of cheese or something like that. And so, it was probably kind of 80% animal protein, 80, 90%. And then I would normally have like a cheat meal or a cheat day where I'd eat, food with sugar and refined carbohydrates and the things that are terrible for you and that Scott hasn't touched in 2 years, occasionally. So I was coming from, I guess, quite a carnivorous approach, but I did expect, from what I learned from reading Kevin's story, Kevin Stock, who you mentioned, who's got a great PDF, which I'll link to, that he, even though he was coming from a very low carb approach when he turned to carnivore, he still experienced a rough adaptation period. So I was kind of ready for that. But mine hasn't actually been that rough from a kind of physiological point of view in terms of like GI distress. I've had minor amounts of that. And then it's just been mad cravings and mood swings, I suppose. But one of the things that I really found quite fascinating is, for the first time, I thought, oh my God, you could actually do OMAD on this. Like, you could quite easily do 1 meal a day. If we're moving away from, obviously, we're not talking about what's optimal now, and that's a separate conversation. But if you wanted to be ultra efficient, I suppose, I never thought that would be possible. I always thought, whenever I heard someone who, saying they did OMAD, even when Mark Strauss said it, I thought, there's no way I could ever see myself doing that. It's just, maybe it's a scared thing about, fear-based thing about, oh, I'm a skinny guy who doesn't want to lose his hard-earned muscle mass, So maybe it's something to do with that. But but I've had I think I've had 2 days where I have actually done that because I've eaten, because I didn't realize just how satiating a purely beef-based diet would be, because it wasn't like I actually wanted to do 1 meal a day. I just couldn't eat anymore. And like you, I had one bad experience where I did eat very late, and I just laid there and my stomach just gargled to death, and I just couldn't sleep. So yeah, big meat-based meals late at night, big meals in general late at night, really, really not good. So that was a bit of a mistake. So that's one of the pros. So I wanted to obviously talk about the pros first before we get onto the cons. So I've seen that. Is that something that you experienced? You know, when you moved over to carnivore, you're like, oh, I can't eat as much food anymore. And that's not necessarily bad.
I had the opposite experience. My appetite went up. And yeah, it's interesting. I think folks are divided, and I'd say probably 80% of the folks find what I'm finding, which is all of a sudden I'm hungrier and more ravenous than ever, especially earlier in the day. And then 20% of folks are more like you, where they're just saying, oh man, you know, after a pound of meat, I am just so full. I couldn't imagine eating more. The food doesn't appeal anymore. So I think it's definitely divided. And Kevin Stock talks about this a lot, that folks are sort of divided, and some folks are just coming from a place of restriction, either intentional or sort of subconscious, where they've undereaten for a long time, or their body might be, have low long-term stores of certain nutrients. And they're just, as soon as they eat meat, all of a sudden they're getting all these vitamins and minerals and nutrients that they had neglected for a long time. And so their body just turns on the hunger signals and they just go. And for a long time, they almost have this insatiable urge to eat at meals. And I definitely found that for myself.
And now it's time for a quick break. Join me this year on the 22nd and 23rd of March 2019 at the Resistance Exercise Conference, the science and application of strength training for health and human performance. We will be joined by the top exercise professionals and researchers like Dr. Doug McGuff, Dr. Jeremy Lowenecki, Dr. James Fisher, and Luke Carlson. You will get the opportunity to connect with exercise professionals from all over the world, get a workout from an expert trainer, and get inspired, rejuvenated, and focused on your strength training business. This year, you have become the center of the conference. There will be a new element where the audience will participate in a crowdsourcing activity to voice challenges, questions, and goals for the keynotes to address head-on. This is my favorite weekend of the year, and I am very excited to attend again and connect with you in person. If you want to take your strength training business to the next level and build a world-class strength training network, I highly recommend you come along and register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. When you register, please add Corporate Warrior to the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. And now back to the show. Interesting. I don't know whether it's because of the diet I've come from, but I find it so satiating that I actually tallied it up, and I will eat anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 calories a day on this diet quite easily, which is probably not too dissimilar to what I was eating previously. I know I've reported lower numbers in the past for those listening, but actually in retrospect, I realized I kind of calculated those wrong, and I think I noted that on an older episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's been quite interesting. Okay. And the other thing I've noticed is just how easy, at least for me, obviously this is just anecdote and personal experience, just how easy it is to lose fat. Oh my God. Like, I ate so much crap, Scott, over Christmas, as you know. So much bad food. I'd put on, but I had been somewhat strategic. I had tried to fast as much as possible. But I'd put on I think I put on like 6 pounds. And I was already like above my normal weight before going into Christmas because of the bulking experiment I did last year, which I obviously stopped short, as you know, after talking to Doug. And it's interesting just how long it took me to get back to my kind of previous leanness. It took me a long time. It just shows you how easy it is to gain body fat and how hard it is to lose it. And so, yeah, I came away from Christmas weighing about 164. My normal weight's around 153. But as I said, I was slightly heavier going to Christmas, so I'd only gained about 6 pounds. But now, and bearing in mind I've only been doing the carnivore diet for like 14 days, I'm weighing in about 155, right? So
Wow.
don't believe I've lost any muscle mass. I mean, it's obviously impossible to tell without a DEXA or someone chopping me up. I just think certainly from one angle, and that is fat loss, this was seen to be very, very, very effective. And obviously part of that in my case is down to just probably some sort of caloric restriction slash.
And also the rebound coming from eating so much junk food.
Right, yeah, or like the water retention that was then liberated. Is that what you were referring to as well?
Yeah, and just like, if you switch, Sean Baker and others talk about this a lot. If you take someone eating a bunch of crap and move them to any somewhat conscious diet, their weight and their health will improve.
Okay, well, that's very honest of you to say, being from the carnivore camp, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, this is why people say vegan diets work. I mean, they're coming from eating French fries and milkshakes and bags of chips or crisps, as you would call them, and tons of candy. It's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm vegan. Oh man, I feel incredible. Yeah, well, you cut out all the processed crap. Like, sure. Yes, of course you lost weight. Some of it was probably muscle, but I think a lot of things are a step up from average.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing I want to say about the pros is, I would say that like my mornings where I do most of my kind of creative thinking and creative work is, I'm not going to say better, but I guess it just feels the same. And I don't have any of those cravings during the morning. I don't have it during the early afternoon. It's just in the evening, I find the cravings start coming up, and we'll talk about that a bit more in the kind of con section. And I guess actually, what? I'll probably move straight onto that, because then I can give me a chance to kind of go through questions I've got for you, Scott. I think that would be the best thing to do. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So the other day I was walking around, walking the dog in the evening, and this is probably day 13, whatever it is, day 12. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got a desperate craving for Whispers of all things, the chocolate Whisper and a scone, which are some of the things I would sometimes eat maybe once a week on a cheat day. And I guess that's relatively normal, as I've been reading about this kind of like the cravings you get during the early days. Question for you is, how long are the cravings going to last for? Is it worse by the fact that I've come from a diet where I have eaten quite a lot of that stuff, especially since Christmas? Obviously, Christmas was, that type of food was ubiquitous. So bear that in mind. Do they just, I'm just amazed when I hear you say you haven't had any food like that for like years. That's just unbelievable to me. And obviously I talked to Art about this, how they're able to just literally cleanse themselves of all of these bad things. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that in terms of what you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I want to commend you, Lawrence, for trying this and for sticking with it, and for being open and honest about your cravings and the downsides and everything. So I definitely don't want to be the person saying, oh, you're weak, shame on you, and making you feel guilty for having cravings and stuff. I don't think that's productive at all. I think cravings are completely normal, depending on how, just like with any other addiction, depending on, tobacco, drugs, pornography, anything stimulating, the more recent you've had that effect and stimulus, and the more frequent and the more intense you've had that stimulus, the harder it is going to be, and the more withdrawal type symptoms you're going to have, getting rid of that. So, I think cravings are different for everyone. I had very few cravings, coming from a ketogenic diet, going to carnivore, pretty much none. I think for like a few months I craved keto cheesecake because my fiance used to make that for me, for my birthday and other special occasions when I was still ketogenic. But I don't have that anymore, and I don't have cravings for that anymore. They completely faded away. And I even like vegetables I used to crave, or things like keto pizza that I used to crave have even gone away. Even cravings for cheese. It's like my palate has changed completely. So I think it takes time, but it's different for everyone. I think eventually your cravings will go away, Lawrence. I just think it won't be soon. And I think the same thing would happen if you were on just a regular ketogenic diet with vegetables and plant oils and things like that. It'll just be it'll take a while, and every time you stimulate those receptors and have a cheat meal, it'll just make it harder. Sorry to say that, but I think that's just the reality of it. But I think something that can help with that, and it sounds like a piece of advice I didn't need when I started the carnivore diet, but you might need, is eat more than you think you need. Overeat and eat more fatty meat than you think you need. And the more you do that, the less you'll want things. I think Ted Naiman speaks about it even, not necessarily in the context of a carnivore diet, but he says, eat 2 pounds of meat a day, and some eggs. And then, don't worry about the cravings, because you'll be pretty damn full and you won't want those other things. So I think that's good advice. Just, either when you're craving or even before you're craving, eat more fatty meat, and hopefully that'll help. But part of it is unfortunately willpower, and you're just going to have to tough it out. For me, that willpower factor did not exist, thankfully, but for a lot of people it does.
How long does it generally take for those that do have the cravings? For that
it's different for everyone. I've heard people say a week, 2 weeks. I've heard people say a month. I've heard people say, I still had cravings a couple months later. So somewhere in that range. I think for you, you're used to having, a cheat meal about once a week, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think it would probably take you, 4 to 6 weeks would be my best guess, but who knows really.
We shall see. It's interesting to hear you compare junk food, for one of a catch-all term, to other drugs, other addictions, things that people are addicted to, because I hadn't thought about it like that for a long time. And the reason I think it's easy for us to not put it in the same category is because it's so ubiquitous, because it's normal to eat chocolate and ice cream and all these things, because everyone's doing it. But that doesn't make it good. And you're probably right, and you perhaps know more about this than me, but I imagine it stimulates the same parts of the brain that a lot of these other addictive substances do, and that's obviously what keeps us addicted to them. And it is just way more accepted, and I think I perhaps fallen for that a little bit. As hard as that is for me to accept, because my cravings are quite severe. They're quite profound. Now here's the other thing though. It's like, the other day, my girlfriend was baking a tray of potatoes with loads of vegetables, loads of veggies and chopped up potatoes on a tray, and butter, which a lot of people, even in, the somewhat clued up community when it comes to diet, would see as a healthy option. And I would have seen that as a healthy option, and I would have eaten that occasionally. And I had a massive craving for that. So there's even a craving for, and this is the thing, is because I've tried to go pretty hardcore, looking at Scott's guide, I've kind of looked at, okay, let's just go all out, not the hardcore. I think the third option is where it's like no coffee, just beef and water kind of thing. But I've gone for like the second one where it's just beef, because I haven't had any eggs or pork or anything like that, or even lamb. And so just beef, water, salt and coffee. And I wonder, is it, some variety? I mean, you talked about your variety, which is quite tiny, to be fair. But that some variety is not necessarily a craving, a bad craving. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's fine to crave. If I'm looking at some potatoes and some veggies, maybe my body requires that and I'm craving it because of that. I don't know. What have you got any thoughts on that? Like where to delineate or discern a craving for junk food versus it being a craving for, like, just when I open the fridge and I see raspberries, I'm like, I could devour those, even if I've had steak, like, even if I'm full on steak, even if and I have been overeating sometimes, to your point, I'll still have those urges.
Yeah, you bring up a few really good points there.
It's like 10 questions in that, but
no. I'll try to pick it apart and then synthesize it back together. One is you talked about it being a stimulant, and I'm not. When people say foods aren't inherently good or bad, I partly agree with that, and I don't think it's good to say, oh, damn ice cream, damn candy, it's evil. But also, I think those people are being a little bit soft, and those foods are objectively not good for you in terms of the nutritional content. So I'll just say I'm kind of torn on that, and there is another perspective. I'm not saying you are a bad person if you eat junk food. People should eat whatever they want to eat, but those foods are objectively bad for you, and they stimulate certain centers in your brain that are the same as hard drugs like cocaine. And obviously those are two very different things, but there are similar dopamine pathways in your brain that are stimulated by consuming them. So that's one thing. I would say on the fact that you still have cravings and the fact that you've tried to be more strict, I would say Kevin's guide is excellent. But just to offer a slightly different perspective, Sean Baker says the biggest mistake you can make when you're starting carnivore. So people say the biggest mistake on keto is not having your electrolytes in check. So having enough salt. I know, you do basketball and you work out. I would say for you especially, make sure you're having extra salt before your workouts. And if you're playing basketball, you might not even want to mix salt in your water. That might just sound disgusting to you, but maybe just take a teaspoon of it down or a tablespoon of it down before you go play and wash it down with some water. But people say the biggest mistake on carnivore is not eating enough. So as much as being strict and eliminating spices and sauces and all that stuff might be great, there is a perspective that says make it enjoyable for yourself. Have some bacon, have some eggs, throw some cheese on there if you need to get extra food down. If you want to have a little bit of some Tabasco sauce or, some garlic powder or, who knows what, just as long as it's not like some sugary barbecue sauce, spice it up a little bit, make it tasty. If that's going to help you be more adherent to the diet, and if it's going to help you get down a little bit more food when you might not be eating enough, and it's going to help you, sort of eliminate those cravings and enjoy it during the adaptation phase, then I say I agree with that perspective. Go for it. Add in those extra things, especially for someone like you who doesn't necessarily have some severe condition for which they'd have to be super sensitive about things like, garlic powder. So I'd say, don't overdo it, but I would add some of those things in. I think it could help you make it more palatable and could help with your cravings a little bit.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think it was always my intention to, like, as per Kevin Stock's plan, is to go hardcore for 30 days and then start reintroducing foods. Because what really fascinated me is this idea of an elimination diet, like finding out what foods are the ones that affect you in a negative way. But I also appreciate that the only way I might be able to do that is if I do stick out an experiment like this for 30 days in order to create that baseline, or actually perhaps longer than 30 days based on some of your comments on this podcast. Because I'm interested, because I heard Kevin talk about how he would be reliant in the past on coffee for energy spikes throughout the day, and how he really struggled with energy. And I'm not sure if I struggled as much as he did, but I certainly wonder if the energy that maybe you and he and other carnivore people experience is an upgraded version of my own. And I'm interested in knowing if that's real, and hence the foray into experimenting into this myself. So the energy, because the body composition was never really something I was fortunately that concerned about. Obviously I've got pretty good body composition doing my previous diet. So that wasn't a huge driver, although suggestions of increased muscle gain was interesting to me, as always. But it was more the energy levels, and waking up not feeling groggy all the time was interesting to me. obviously that could be down to sort of many variables. But yeah, I guess, you know, at the end of this, I guess, initial phase, I will look to start reintroducing things one at a time and seeing the effects, because yeah, I don't know. I miss just you talking about bacon and cheese is like making me salivate, you know? So I might,
go for it.
I might throw that in eventually, but you've kind of motivated me to stick this out for a little bit longer. Because why not? Hey, why not? A tiny bit of suffering suffering's a strong word. A tiny bit of, I guess, additional discipline, shall we say, is perhaps not so bad. Now,
yeah, I don't know. I would push back a little bit there, just because it sounds like I hear it in your voice, and I've experienced it myself, and maybe I'm projecting. It sounds like you're really pushing yourself to get to these 30 days, and there should be a little bit of discomfort, but I don't think it should require that much discipline and willpower. And to the extent that you can make it a little bit more enjoyable for yourself, and you don't hit that 30-day mark and just slip, and you start reintroducing things and you go, fuck it. I think there's value to making it a little bit more sustainable for yourself, to the point that you enjoy it and you're not exercising as much willpower and mental energy. So, you know, I would throw in a little bit of, you know, take it easy, but I would throw in a little bit of that bacon and eggs and cheese if that does sound appealing to you.
Okay. I might just do that then. That's some good advice. Now, the only other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of the negatives about this diet is, well, I guess going hand in hand with the cravings is the social life. That is a real challenging one. You know, I had a bit of discourse with someone on Facebook. I think his name's Mark, on Facebook there, about, he's also a listener, I believe, of the podcast, about this. And he was saying how him and I believe his wife or girlfriend, have been doing this for a while, got incredible results. I think they've lost 15 stone between them. And now when they go to parties, like, wow, they're just not bothered about the junk food that's everywhere. And people have come to the point, their friends and family, they don't offer them anymore because they know what they're about. And I find that incredibly inspiring and interesting. You know, he gave me some pointers, which I can't quite remember off the top of my head exactly what he said. But yeah, I try not to go on Facebook too much these days, as I've come to realize it's probably a net negative on my life. But no, I found that bit of conversation quite useful. But all that being said, maybe it's too early in the day for me, but I struggle to figure out how I'm going to conquer this whole social thing. So do you want to tell me, because I know this is something we've spoken about before, Scott, but I'd love to hear how you are tackling social situations in your own life.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I won't lie to you, it is difficult. But, you know, if someone once said, if you want to be more than ordinary, or if you want to be extraordinary, you have to be out of the ordinary sometimes. You can't be afraid to be not ordinary and not quote unquote normal in some situations. So you have to take lengths to not sort of descend into mediocrity and the average. And that takes discipline and it takes boundaries. And I think it takes integrity and sort of knowing your self-worth and deciding when things aren't worth it for you. So for me, you know, if someone offered me food or tried to impose food on me, I would say, no, thank you very much. I can't eat that. Or I don't eat that. I choose not to eat that. It's not for me. I really appreciate it. But you know, I actually only eat meat. And then it usually enters into a line of questioning, that I try to, you know, make positive and not defensive, where I say, oh yeah, only meat. And they go, no fruit, no vegetables. And I just keep saying, no, just lots of meat. And then I just try to be open.
What do you say when they ask you about fruit and veg? What's your kind of stock response to that?
I'm actually, you know, people may be disappointed to hear that I don't educate people that much unless, you know, they've asked like 5 to 10 questions and they feel like they really want to learn the why. I mostly just focus on the what I do. So they say no fruit, no vegetables. And I go, yeah, no, I really like eating only meat. And they'll go, that's interesting. And a lot of them will end it there. But then, you know, a small percent of people will keep saying, oh, why? Or aren't you worried about nutrient deficiencies? And I'll say, no, I'm not, like haven't gotten scurvy yet, haven't died yet, haha. And they'll say, how long have you been doing this? Like a few weeks. And I'll say, actually, I've been doing it for over 2 years. I'll go, wow. Like, where did you hear about this? And I'll be like, and then I'll start telling them, I have a podcast. I talk to doctors and researchers about it. And then I'll actually like answer their questions if they've, kept up the conversation, but mostly it just ends with, oh, okay, you eat only meat, I have a brother who loves barbecue. Great. Okay. That's the end of the conversation. But just like some practical tips for people, if you're going somewhere, you don't know what the food's going to be like, obviously eat something beforehand, get up on your meat. If you're traveling, you can always find, a fast food place where you can just order the burgers. You can go to a grocery store and get, something that might not be completely optimal, but like, they usually have, some good brand of grass-fed hot dogs you could eat. You can get boiled eggs. Almost every restaurant, you can order a steak or a burger and say, just no spices, no sauces, please.
The problem with that one, though, the problem with the restaurant, and sorry to cut you off, Scott, is you have to spend a lot of money if you want to get a filling meal. So you buy a steak, right? You get one steak, you're going to spend, whatever. Let me guess there and where you are, maybe $25, $30, maybe more. But if you want, a filling meal because you don't want to have those temptations, then you're going to need 2 or 3 of those bad boys. It's going to you're going to spend a lot of money.
Sure.
There's no way of getting away from that, I suppose, unless you do it at home previous.
Absolutely. I don't eat out that much. I bring my food to work. I cook all my meals. But when I do go out to eat, it's sort of just a cost of health and a cost of doing business and a cost of enjoyment. Again, if you wanted to spend less money at the restaurant, you can pre-eat a meal. Sacrifice your meal frequency a little bit. It's not gonna make a difference one day. Eat some extra, have a snack, do whatever you got to do. Have some high quality beef sticks or jerky or pork rinds or something. I think those are all valid options, or, fast if you feel like you can do that. Oftentimes, people will be going to a restaurant late at night. I'll join them. I'll say, I don't like to eat late at night. It disturbs my sleep. Or I'll just say I'm not hungry and I'll just have, a tea or a glass of warm water, or a glass of ice water, and I'll just enjoy their company. And most of the time, no one even says anything. The waiter just says, what would you like? And I'd say, nothing for me. Thank you. I'm not hungry. They go, okay, great. And that's literally the end of the conversation. So I think, again, it goes down to having purpose and having a little bit of self-confidence to be able to make those decisions in public. And, at the end of the day, you think everyone is watching you and cares about your decisions. And, I am not immune to that. I've experienced that myself, but people care a lot less about what you're doing and thinking than you would be led to believe.
Yeah, well said. So just to clarify, if you do go to a restaurant, I appreciate you tend to kind of avoid some of that. But if you do, would you pay double then? If you knew that you could, okay, I'm only going to get one steak in this meal, I'll just buy two of those without any of the extras.
Yes. Or again, I would pre-eat or post-eat on my own, that meal, or, go someplace else that has a cheaper option beforehand, like a fast food place or a grocery store, and grab something. Or I would just pony up and pay the extra money.
Do you know, it's funny. I've made a friend here who will be, I guess, pleased that we've probably mentioned him. His name's Sean Dunleavy, and he's a local here in Galway. And, I don't know how many carnivores there are in Galway and Ireland. I'm not expecting there to be very many since it's quite a niche community. But we've got, very similar interests. He's really into high intensity training now. Big fan of the podcast as well. So we have this weekly event where we'll go to McDonald's and we'll buy. Well, I've worked out that 12 is the right dose for me, but 12 burger patties. and we sit opposite each other and we're, having our, 10 to 15 burger patties each, with a coffee and just enjoying we always have a great conversation about all sorts of things. And And, he listens to a lot of podcasts. He loves like Peter Attia and, Sean Baker's show and your show as well. And so he'll educate me on the latest, and it's always really fun. And I just wanted to point out that, he's almost like my accountability partner. And I think that if you're starting this for the first time, it can't hurt to have someone to kind of give you a bit of moral support and maybe spend some time with, maybe have some meals together. Because I've found that personally very, very helpful. Because when I'm having days where, I don't know, if I have a day with him where I go to McDonald's and we have these burgers, they're 100% beef. There's not too much crap in them from what I understand. I don't feel like I want to give it up. I don't feel like I want to fall off the horse. It's very different when I'm in that environment. So I don't know if that's something you've experienced, Scott, or heard from others at all.
Sorry, can you just
in
clarify
terms
that?
of like other people who listeners of your show, guests who advocate some sort of accountability or going into this type of thing with someone else as well?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, if you live with someone else, a parent, a spouse, a friend, if they can do it with you, that obviously helps a lot. But I think, that's partly the benefit of social media, these groups, Instagram, Twitter. It's almost a way of keeping yourself accountable and feeling part of a community. I mean, that's a big part of reason why I started the Carnivore Cast. Is I felt like, it was a great way to become a bigger part of the community, help give back somewhat, and also, feel like I could really connect with people that I could talk to for a long time. I mean, I'm sure you feel that with high intensity training. And, I talked to you about when you went to the Resistance Exercise Conference for the first time, and, you're surrounded by these people and you just felt, elated and like inspired, and like you were learning so much and having such a good time. I experienced that for the first time when I went to Paleo FX. I think it's awesome to feel like part of a tribe and feel that deep sense of community. So I think what's great about social media, for all the problems with it and all the addictive qualities and effects on our psychology, is it can create some of those communities in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention on the negative side is, and you've kind of touched on this. Now, I had no issue with basketball. So, I played basketball the other day and I performed perfectly fine. In fact, I played bloody well. However, I had a training session yesterday at the gym, lower body session, terrible. And what I found really challenging was pushing myself to failure, which is obviously the goal of my existing program, is to be able to get to failure in 1 or 2 sets. And I really just couldn't get there. I just didn't have the energy, didn't have the motivation to do it. And, it could just be that, once in a while we have a workout like that, or it could be something to do with this diet and the adaptation period. But you reckon that one way around that is by supplementing with salt pre-workout perhaps, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a massive factor. I think you need more salt on ketogenic and carnivorous diets, and especially before a workout. There have been studies that have shown to boost performance. Just regular table salt or pink Himalayan salt, whatever you have, is excellent, especially if you're fasting, especially if you've had coffee, which can deplete your mineral and electrolyte stores. I find it just makes such a massive difference. Even some nights after I've worked out, after I've eaten, 3 salty meals of beef, I'll have, a tablespoon of salt just to sort of top me off, because I know I've worked out that day. I know I've expended more electrolytes, and I feel great doing that. I think your body self-regulates salt, so you don't really have to worry about consuming too much. And there are a million things, as you know, that can affect workout performance. So maybe you didn't get enough sleep the night before, 2 nights before, 3 nights before. Maybe you had a little bit of extra stress in your life. Maybe you're spending so much time fantasizing about pastries that it depleted your willpower and mental energy. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe you're expending too much discipline on this diet, Lawrence, and you just have none left over to push yourself to failure.
That's a very good point. Possibly all of the above, perhaps. How much salt would you suggest then when I do have perhaps a pre-workout? Like what sort of dose are we talking about?
I would recommend like 3/4 of a tablespoon is a decent amount.
Yeah, cool. Now, just before we move on to Q&A, have you got time, Scott? Appreciate time's ticking on. Have you all right for some more questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Let's do it.
Just keep me posted. Now, you telling me, before we move on to the Q&A, if you walk past, I mean, I've been to the States a couple of times. I've been to, I was in Chicago last year before I went to the conference that you mentioned in Minnesota. And, there's so much delightful sugary food everywhere. Are you telling me when you see a donut, you don't look at that thing and go, I would destroy that? You don't have that feeling at all? Like, it doesn't have, I guess it sounds like it clearly has some sort of power over me and over a lot of people, but it doesn't sound like you have that at all. You're not impressed by it.
Yeah, it's weird. And I would love to say that I am a superhuman person and it's all due to my mental fortitude and Zen-like state, but it's really not. It's just, I think it's just a side effect of eating only meat for a long time. Those things just lose their appeal.
Yeah. And do you think if you did have like one donut that you would actually move backwards and perhaps you would find that those cravings would return, perhaps?
Absolutely.
Right. Because was there a time before ketogenic diet then when you would eat bad stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No question. Yeah. I would eat, when I was doing lightweight rowing, I mean, we would lose and gain 20 pounds in a week for like 8 weeks in a row when we had races and had to weigh in. And I mean, we did not do it in a healthy or scientific fashion. We would stop eating on Wednesday. We would stop drinking water part day through Thursday. And, all while doing, 3 hours of cardio a day and barely eating the days before, eating like a small salad with a tiny piece of protein. And then you'd get to Friday and you would have nothing. And then you'd weigh in at 5 p.m. and then you would go binge. You would eat 10,000 calories for the next 3 days. And then it starts over on Monday. You have to get back down to your weigh-in weight. I would eat, I was like dunking Oreos in Nutella and eating a whole jar of Nutella that way with all the Oreos, like after eating a full meal of like pizza. And it was disgusting. It was so gross. I mean, I conquered every junk food known to man. Trust me, I had cravings. But it has magically gone away.
Interesting. Okay, so a couple questions for you. Now, it's going to sound really odd, but when you're doing a elimination diet, you're literally removing, well, like I have, practically everything, which is hilarious, by the way, because I open the fridge up and I'm like, oh, I can just have that one steak on the second shelf there. Everything else off limits, which is a weird experience. But it led me to think, I was brushing my teeth and I'm like, should I be, what if, I know we're getting extreme here, but I'm thinking, should I be using this type of toothpaste? So I use a brand that Tim Ferriss recommended years ago called Jason, I think it's called, with 2 dots above the S, I believe, or above the O. And so that sounds like the name Jason. And the only reason I guess I'm influenced by Tim's recommendation, but also it's free of a lot of the chemicals that you find in things like Colgate, like I think SLS and fluoride and gluten and what have you. I've got some of those wrong, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to say. So yeah. I'm curious, what do you do in terms of like dental care? You got great teeth too. That's why I ask.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't think anyone's ever made the mistake of saying that before. But I think I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think I personally, just to sort of optimize this stuff, try to avoid things like parabens and tea tree oils and lavender. And I sent you the study once.
Yeah,
I would say put it in the show notes, but good luck finding it. That some of these things can have estrogenic-like effects. A lot of these chemicals can lower your testosterone and disrupt your estrogen in harmful ways. But I would say, the 80-20 or even the 90, what will get you 90% of the results for 10% of the effort is to just not worry about that kind of stuff. Focus on diet, focus on exercise. Those are what are going to be really the big levers. Sleep is another one. But just personally, I also use Jason. I think the only thing there is if you're using like a super sweet toothpaste, maybe it would like keep your cravings around for a little bit longer, just because you're getting kind of that hit of something sweet, but for the most part, don't worry about it. Like a mint toothpaste, you're fine.
Okay, cool. So no, I hear you. And I'm just curious, do you floss? Like, what's your kind of regime, your routine for that sort of stuff?
Yeah. A lot of long-term carnivores have like stopped flossing, stopped brushing their teeth, stopped showering, stopped leaving their caves in the wilderness. But I still floss and brush my teeth every night. Sometimes I floss in the middle of the day if I've had like lamb or a big steak and I have a lot of stuff stuck in my teeth. I actually usually don't brush my teeth in the morning. It's kind of weird, but I don't have perfect looking teeth. I won't say that, but every time I go to the dentist, I've never had a cavity. I've never had anything. And they say your teeth look great. So I think just, flossing and brushing is completely sufficient. And I do that once a day.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Right. Okay. So, and you still have coffee, don't you? You'll have one a day. Is that right?
Yep, I have a coffee. I drink only cold brew coffee. So cold brew coffee is different than iced coffee. Iced coffee is you take a hot a regular coffee that's made hot, and then you pour it over ice. Cold brew coffee is coffee that's actually steeped in cold water, and it has less acid. And I've found as I've gone carnivore, and maybe this is one of the downsides of carnivore is you become almost less resilient in some ways. So I found I'm more sensitive to like the acid in coffee. So I only drink cold brew coffee now, which is great. I can get it free at work and very cheap from Trader Joe's. So I just drink cold brew coffee, one like 10-ounce coffee a day. So not a lot. And I've also found that on carnivore is that whereas I used to drink like a 16 to 20 ounce coffee and then usually like a green tea after that. And like my energy would be like normal with that. And I'd be like sluggish before I had it. Now I wake up on carnivore and I'm like ready to go. And sometimes even when I have just that amount of coffee, I'm like buzzing. It's a little bit too much. So I think your tolerance and your need for those stimulants goes down. And a lot of people have found that. But I don't think it's necessary to cut out coffee completely for most people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What you said there, one of the things is just how sensitive you become to potentially bad, I don't know how to label this, but foods that might not be ideal for you have a even more severely negative effect because you're perhaps not used to consuming them on a semi-regular basis. Yeah, is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's completely fair to say. And it's a thing I think about mentally is like, if I was on a ketogenic or low carb diet, I probably wouldn't experience a lot of the benefits I've found from carnivore, but it would be a little bit easier socially. It would be, if I accidentally had, certain spices or a little bit of sauce or, some of a vegetable thing, my stomach wouldn't go crazy. So it's a trade-off, how far do you want to go?
Because there is part of me that's like, yeah, you know what, I could probably, like a big step for me would be, I suppose, just cutting out carbohydrate, right? And doing like, let's say I reverted back to my old model where I would do 6 days on and then 1 day, or I'd go to a social event and just not, or have the odd beer and be like, fine, like, I don't want to think about it. I just do it. And, I have some mouth pleasure or short-term enjoyment and I pay the temporary consequences. But I was worried that going over to a full kind of carnivore diet, that the impact would be quite severe versus my previous, which had, carbohydrate in it. So I'm just wondering if there's any real detriment to if I were to switch to that, if that makes sense. Do you kind of understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah. I totally understand where you're coming from. I think, it's a spectrum. There's a trade-off. Like you could say, I just want to never have to use any willpower, never have to make decisions about it. And I'm so socially uncomfortable that I'm just going to eat whatever is put in front of me ever. And I'm just going to blindly eat, which I think is what 99% of people do.
Yeah.
And, life would be easier in terms of choices, but it would eventually be a lot harder in terms of the way you feel, your body composition, what you're able to accomplish, and your health. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you could be a, level 3, according to Kevin Stock carnivore, eating only grass-fed meat, no coffee, no spices, no, just water and beef. And you could feel amazing all the time and be ripped, but have, some trouble and some adjustments to make in social situations. So, and there's a million things in between.
Yeah, that's a really good way actually to kind of wrap this one up. I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. So anything else? Oh yeah, the final thing I want to ask you before we get your details, Scott, is veggies. So I think it was a table on Facebook or Instagram or somewhere from a carnivore group that had a table of all these different vegetables, and I can't remember the exact label on the column, but I believe it was something about how these veggies are harmful. We hear a lot about different people who are trying carnivore, people like Michaela and Jordan Peterson, who are obviously quite famous, and a lot of people in the carnivore tribes who are seeing enormous benefits when they remove vegetables. Mark Stroud talks about how his arthritis went away, which is very profound. When he was clicking his fingers on your podcast, like that's challenging to reconcile, because it's like, yeah, is that placebo? Maybe. But then you got to think, like, how can someone go from not being able to click their fingers at all to then be able to click them at will? And obviously he uses the example of, because he does a lot of kind of recreational shooting, doesn't he? So he talks about the example of changing mags and things like that. So yeah, I'm just really curious on your thoughts on, because I know there's not much, perhaps there's not much decent scientific research around this. So I'm just curious how you feel about vegetables and some of these foods and their harmful effects. Because you've got people like, for instance, Ben Greenfield, who, might have his, obviously has vested interests in various different foods and supplements that he might sell or promote. But he certainly thinks that the stresses from vegetables might not be that harmful at all. So yeah, just curious to know your thoughts on vegetables and whether they're harmful or not. Maybe that's a big question, I know. So
yeah. I mean, I think Ben Greenfield's very smart, but I also think he has a lot of loyal followers who are vegan or plant-based, and he has been promoting eating like pounds of spinach a day for so long. He does some crazy things, but I think for him to promote carnivore would just be antithetical to a lot of the things he's said and promoted for such a long time. It'd be hard for him to change that. I have a lot of respect for what he does, and I think he's helping a ton of people, but I just don't see that story kind of changing. But I think, vegetables are optional. They are, I haven't seen sufficient evidence to say they are beneficial. All the research I have seen has been epidemiological, and it's shown that having more vegetables is beneficial as a substitute for processed food. So is it that you're eating less processed food and therefore you're eating healthier, or is it that the vegetables are actually having a health effect? I don't know. And I think for people with more extreme conditions, like Mark's debilitating arthritis, or folks on my podcast who have had depression and have found no relief from tons of different methods. We're seeing, if you go to the website meatheals.com, you'll see all these conditions of people like Michaela Peterson who've had PCOS, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, IBS, just hundreds of conditions that have been relieved from going from a ketogenic diet to a carnivore diet. Such a small change. It's unbelievable. And some of those people, it's probably partly placebo. I'm not going to lie. Placebo. But I think there is something to be said about, a lot of these plants only have one defense mechanism against predators. They can't run away, and that's chemicals. And so these chemicals, these what people call phytonutrients, but they're really phytotoxins, are a stressor on our body. And people like Rhonda Patrick would argue that they're a hormetic stressor, meaning our body super compensates for that stress. and overcomes it just like it would exercise. And ultimately we become stronger because of it. Mm-hmm. But I think there's an argument to be made that, maybe it's just purely negative stress, especially for people in those conditions. It can be a purely negative stress. Now, you and I are fairly healthy young males. We would do fine to eat vegetables. We would probably do fine to eat some grains and even some processed food occasionally. But, I personally have found through self-experimentation, which I think is the final answer to all this, that I do feel better on carnivore. So I just encourage people to try it. Maybe you find you have a huge step change from just cutting out grains, lowering your carbohydrate intake, and eating more animal proteins. That's great. You don't need to take it any further. Maybe you try carnivore for 30 days and you say, it was fine. I was more full, or I was more hungry, but I didn't notice any other health changes. Fine. Add the vegetables back if you like that, if you like some variety. But, it's a spectrum, and people should just try it out. And, if people really want to dig into the science on negative effects of plants and vegetables, I would encourage you to check out Dr. Georgia Ead's site, Diagnosis Diet. I think that's the best resource for that.
Cool. Excellent way to wrap this one up, Scott. Well said. And I think you've raised some really good points there. This has been really fun. You've blown my mind, to be honest. And I didn't expect a lot of these types of answers. So I think I'll be thinking about this a fair bit and listening back to this one for sure. And I'm definitely going to be adding a tiny bit of variety into my current diet, I think. So appreciate the recommendation on that. What's the best way for the listeners to find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me on, Lawrence. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Like I said, I've listened to so many hours of your podcast and gotten so much value out of it. So, if folks are coming here for the first time, go check out all of Lawrence's other episodes. They're well worth it. I can be found at carnivorecast.com. That's all one word, just Carnivore Cast, like as in podcast.com. You can also find my podcast on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, Google Play, Spotify. Just type in Carnivore and you'll see Carnivore Cast. And I'm on every piece of social media. Just search Carnivore Cast and you'll find me there. And, feel free to reach out to me, shoot me a question, email me. I am open to it. I'm very responsive and I love hearing from people.
Cool. And to all those listening, to find the blog post for this episode, please go to corporatewarrior.co/carnivorecast. And for all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Discover how to improve health, become a great personal trainer, and build a successful high-intensity strength training business. Check out corporatewarrior.co. corporatewarrior.co.
This episode is brought to you by the Resistance Exercise Conference, the science and application of strength training for health and human performance. Would you like to learn from the top strength training professionals and researchers, network and connect with other exercise professionals from all over the world, and get inspired, rejuvenated, and focused on your strength training business? I certainly do, and that is why this will be my second appearance at the conference. It was my favorite weekend in 2018, and I am really excited to attend again this year. There will be keynote presentations from Dr. Doug McGuff, Dr. Jeremy Lowenecki, Dr. James Fisher, and Luke Carlson. Moreover, the attendee has become the center of the conference. There will be a new element where the audience will participate in a crowdsourcing activity to voice challenges, questions, and goals for the keynotes to address head-on. The conference will be held on the 22nd and 23rd of March 2019 in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Graduate Hotel. Register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. If you want to take your strength training business to the next level and build a world-class strength training network, I highly recommend you come along and register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com. When you register, please add Corporate Warrior to the How Did He Hear About Us field. So again, register now over at resistanceexerciseconference.com.